Welcome to Siding with Love, a podcast of the Gloucester Unitarian Universalist Church. My name is Carol Bousquet, and I'm one of the co-hosts, along with Reverend Janet Parsons. We are excited to present our very first episode of the podcast, Siding with Love. Our goal is to create a space for thoughtful conversation and connection, with new episodes released monthly. You can find more information and listen to our latest episodes by visiting our website, gloucesteruu.org. Now let me introduce, for the very first time, our minister, Reverend Janet Parsons.
Hi, Carol. Thank you so much for thinking of doing this and putting the time and effort into learning how to do it, because this is something I would never have been able to do by myself. So this is very exciting. We are realizing that we're doing this as we enter a brand new season. We're here on the second day of fall, and we always take this opportunity to wish our Jewish friends and neighbors a Happy New Year, Rosh Hashanah. There's so much happening right now, and it's wonderful to just be participating in all that energy.
Janet, can you tell us a little bit about our church, the Gloucester Unitarian Universalist Church, please?
I would love to. Yes, we are originally a Universalist church. We were gathered in 1779. So as one of my colleagues said to me one day, "You're older than the country." And I just find that delightful. We split off from the Congregationalist Church here in Gloucester, and were founded by a group of people who were studying Universalist theology on their own and came to some decisions that they really needed to explore this brand new religion. And Universalism was the story that all would be saved. Universalism stood for universal salvation. And this was heretical at the time. People believed in the possibility of eternal punishment. Universalists felt that a loving God would never consign God's children to eternal punishment. And so this church was formed, and there were other little churches forming around the eastern seaboard at the time. We were the first one to formally be gathered. So we grew, and eventually in 1806 built the building that everybody sees today, the beautiful yellow wood structure on Middle Street that has been there since 1806 and is still going strong. We are there every Sunday morning and plenty of times during the week as well, still preaching that same message of love for everyone, and that everyone has a seat at the table, that a loving God doesn't leave anybody out. That theology really inspires us to treat other people that way as well. We can't believe that and turn our backs on other people. So that calls us to love and to justice and to trying to be as inclusive as we possibly can and create belonging for everyone who needs to find us.
As a 30-year-plus Unitarian Universalist, former Catholic, I have fallen in love with our faith traditions and rituals, and have certainly found a welcoming home at our Gloucester Unitarian Universalist Church, which especially these days is serving such an important purpose in buoying my spirit. Can we talk briefly about the Reverend Murray?
Of course. Our founding minister was a man named John Murray, and if that last name sounds familiar, it's because he married Judith Sargent Murray, who was from a member of the Sargent family from Gloucester, whose home is still maintained as a house museum right on Middle Street. John Murray came to the U.S. from England. He had landed in debtor's prison because he started preaching the Universalist message and promptly was blackballed and not allowed to work. Once he was released from debtor's prison, he got on a ship deciding to come to America for a new start and vowing to never preach again. His ship went aground off the coast of New Jersey. He went ashore in a small boat looking for provisions and ran into somebody named Thomas Potter, who had built a church. Thomas Potter had become familiar with the Universalist message and built a church in case someone would come to preach the word of Universalism. Somehow, Thomas Potter encountered John Murray on the road and said, "You're the one we've been waiting for." And John Murray said, "Oh no, I have vowed never to do this again." So they argued for days while the ship was aground on a sandbar off the coast of what's now Murray Grove, New Jersey. And finally, Thomas Potter wore John Murray down and said, "If the ship is still here on Sunday morning, will you preach for us?" John Murray finally broke down and said, "All right." Sunday morning came, ship was still there. The church was packed with local folks who had heard the word that a preacher was coming to give them a new hopeful message. John Murray preached, and suddenly a sailor appeared in the door and said, "The wind has shifted, the ship is floating, we're leaving." So off they went. That is our founding myth. A religion needs a founding myth. That is the Universalist founding story as told by John Murray himself in his autobiography. And ultimately, he made his way up and down the eastern seaboard, preaching this message everywhere he went, and grew quite a following, and eventually came to Boston, where he met Winthrop Sargent from Gloucester. And the Sargents invited him up here, and once he came up here, he fell in love with Gloucester. And he did continue to travel and to preach elsewhere. He said in his autobiography that in Gloucester, he felt that he really had found his home. So that is the beginnings of our congregation. He was our first minister. He was not popular in the town because, as I said, he was preaching this message that no one would be punished eternally. And that frightened people. They were worried that they wouldn't be able to control people's behavior if people weren't afraid of going to hell. So they would throw stones at him. They tried to run him out of town. Somehow he just never went. So very, very brave man, very committed. And from there, the church grew and grew until it was growing everywhere, in fact, and until the day came when they outgrew their little original church, which was basically a log cabin, and they built the big church on Middle Street.
I'll be darned. I had not heard every one of those details, nor have I read his biography. Now, he had something to do with the separation of church and state. Can you elaborate on that briefly?
Oh, yes. Okay, that's an important one. The First Parish Church was angry that a number of their people left to go follow Murray. And when people left, they also stopped paying their taxes to support First Parish Church. Back in those days, your tax money was assigned to the official church, which was First Parish. So First Parish was getting less tax revenue, and they started confiscating property from the people who had left the church to join the Universalists. They took silver from one house, and they would send the constables in and just have them grab things that were of value in lieu of taxes. I believe that at some point, one of the Universalists owned a sailing vessel it was down in Salem Harbor preparing for a voyage, and they went on board and took the anchor. So we have all these great stories about people losing their property. So ultimately, people decided to sue First Parish for the right to pay their tax money to the church where they were attending. And it sounds ridiculous to us now, but this in the early 1800s was how churches were financed. So over time, the court case had to go all the way to the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court. It was appealed multiple times. It went back and forth. Ultimately, it was determined that churches outside of the official church had the right to not pay taxes to the church. And that was the basis for the First Amendment in the U.S. Constitution of the separation of church and state, that the state couldn't insist on money from churches.
Got it.
So
Also fascinating.
it is. That's it in a nutshell. A lawyer would be standing here tearing his hair out. But
We can all learn more, I'm sure.
yes.
And before we leave the topic, I just wanted to mention how wonderful the Judith Sargent House is, the museum. Well worth a visit if you're going to be in Gloucester. So let's change direction and introduce ourselves. Tell us a little bit about your background and what led you to becoming a minister.
That's always a fun story because it's complicated. I like to say I was a suburban hockey mom working part-time raising kids, and a couple of things happened. As the kids got older, we started feeling that they needed a church, and so we started bringing them to the local Unitarian Universalist church, and I found a home there very quickly. And eventually, I began working in a UU church in the next town and worked there for several years and just became more and more part of it and feeling as though this was a really important piece of my life. And then Hurricane Katrina happened, and my home church began sending groups of relief workers down to New Orleans, and I started going. And that became really one of the central things, the most important parts of my life. I ended up going on or leading 10 trips down to the Gulf Coast, and I could see there was often a minister there. I came to see what a minister could bring to this sort of work in terms of making meaning, helping people process the trauma that they were experiencing. And more, I was becoming just so drawn to this work. And one thing led to another, and I decided to put a toe into seminary and see what happened. And yeah, I never turned back. This was the right path for me to be on.
Well, lucky us. As we all know, we're celebrating your tenure at our church. In my case, a little background is that I used to be a radio television broadcaster in the United States Air Force and decided, given the issues of today, it was time to dust off those skills and offer my experience to what I consider an important cause, both our church and culture. There's a lot to be discussed, and ways to convey our title, Siding with Love, to our listeners in a way that hopefully will communicate to them how serious we are at inclusion. So why don't we talk for a minute about our services and the theme of the month?
Thank you. I should back up for just a moment
Sure.
and say a little tiny bit about Unitarian Universalism and the values and beliefs that underpin our religious tradition. Sometimes when people are talking about Unitarian Universalism, they will say something like, they can believe whatever they want. And while I actually do think that's true to some extent, no matter what religious tradition you're part of, we do have a set of principles and a set of core values that are intended to guide us and to help us live the most ethical lives and the most nourishing lives that we can, so that we ourselves grow into who we should be, and that we, in fact, then can help everyone else, help society to be a better and safer place to live. So when I talk about our principles, the first one always is that we believe in the inherent worth and dignity of all people. And everything just kind of flows from that point. It's like if you accept that and you internalize it, then it colors what you do. We also have a set of 7 core values, well, 6, although we like to say that it's 6 values with love at the center. And those include things like valuing justice, equity, transformation, pluralism, interdependence. We're all in this together. None of us are alone here. And generosity. And so we try to implement those in our daily lives, and we try to hold love, or however you want to define love, at the center of everything that we do. So in our services, we try to embody those values, those principles, and remind each other each week that that's what we're here to do. And in order to do that well, we belong to a service that offers us themes of the month. And we have a monthly theme, and they're theological topics. So each week of the month, I will try to tailor a service to some aspect of a theme or another. And so we thought it would be helpful today just to introduce everybody to a little bit of Unitarian Universalism, to talk about this month's theme and how that can end up showing up in the services. The theme this month is belonging. And that's more than inclusion or tolerance or even acceptance. Belonging is creating space where people genuinely feel that they can be who they are and can contribute in ways that make them feel whole, but that they show up and are seen and appreciated and understood. So this past Sunday, we actually decided to flip that on its head a little bit and talk about the epidemic of loneliness that is happening in our country. And this is something that we don't talk about enough because a lot of people are quite isolated. And I think most of us try to hide that. We don't really want to. We don't want people to know. Someone sang a song in church on Sunday, an old Roy Orbison song, When You're Only Lonely. And it spoke to this sense of there's something wrong with me. Why am I lonely? It's my fault. And it was fascinating to work on this service because I was reminded that in 2023, the U.S. Surgeon General put out a report on loneliness and the lack of social connection. And that was extremely helpful. He started this by going around the country and doing a listening tour and asking people what they felt was wrong in their lives. And over and over and over again, people kept telling him how alone they felt. So that inspired a lot of research, and they discovered some really fascinating things, particularly the effects on physical health of loneliness and isolation. And they said that being lonely could have the same effect on your body as smoking 15 cigarettes per day. And I thought this was shocking, absolutely shocking.
It is shocking.
And they also demonstrated that people who are alone and not well connected have considerably higher rates of heart attacks and of strokes. I think it was in the range of between 25 and 30% more risk of heart attacks and strokes for people who weren't socially connected. And this makes a great deal of sense to me when you think about the effects of stress on the body and how humans evolved to be living in community. We're meant to be together. And so when people are outside of those connections, I intuitively understand the effects on the body of the stress that this would create. And this is invisible. Nobody's going to see it. And so it's only reading these reports to find out how they've been able to quantify the effects and show how damaging it is to live your life outside of community. So this was really important for us. It's a very important reminder that people should be trying to connect and people should be trying to join, and that religious institutions can be a huge piece of that. It's kind of a built-in community that people are welcomed and invited into more easily than they are many other types of communities where you need certain skill set or certain beliefs. So this is, looking at loneliness is really helpful in terms of helping us to understand what the motivation is to seek belonging, as we're meant as humans to do.
The theme of our month. Mm-hmm. I was in a sales training at one point in my career, I was in property management, and the sales trainer explained to us that today's culture, we are transient. We no longer live on the same block or in the same village or even in the same neighborhood that we all grew up, some of us expecting we would have those connections and maintain those relationships, that community for the rest of our lives. But today's modern world calls on us to move and then move again for jobs or for whatever reason. And the sales trainer's point was that sometimes as salespeople, you're someone's first conversation of the day, and that you always need to keep that in perspective because they're lonely and they are dying to be connected in a way. I mean, if you've lived in a large apartment complex, or a condo complex, or really wherever, sometimes you can live on a street and never get to meet your neighbors anymore. You live in an apartment complex, you walk by people at the mail room and they don't even lift their head and say hello. Mm-hmm. There needs to be an antidote from that isolation.
There does. Another piece of what you mention is how separated families are now. And it used to be that multiple generations of families would live either right in the same neighborhood or often right in the same houses. I mean, think of triple deckers and probably multiple extended family members in each unit. And that happens less and less. And so you've got grandparents who are seeing the grandkids a couple times a year. I think back on the pandemic and how alone we all were. I live alone, so speaking for myself, remembering Thanksgiving and Christmas alone and how that felt. Oh,
don't we all remember?
Don't we all remember? Yes, and I hope we always will remember, because it's important to hold on to that so that we know that how important it is to find a different way and to help each other out.
So we're going to switch it up again as we reach the end of our first episode with a fun segment that Janet and I hope we will make as a regular segment. And the segment is called, What Are You Reading? In my case, I brought along the church book group book, which is James by Percival Everett, a Pulitzer Prize finalist. James is a reworking of Huckleberry Finn from the Black slaves' perspective, and we're discussing that at our church on September 30. What I am reading is Why Fascists Fear Teachers, Public Education and the Future of Democracy by Randi Weingarten. She is the president of the American Federation of Teachers. I'm sure she has a lot to say about this, and I know I am looking forward to savoring that book. Are you reading anything special, Janet?
I always have about 5 books that are half done. So I am currently reading The Covenant of Water. It's a wonderful multi-generational story. That's the kind of thing that I love.
Author's name again?
Abraham Verghese.
That's right.
Yeah. And it's a story of a multi-generational family in India. And then I am looking ahead to October because I am a big Louise Penny detective novel fan, and her latest is coming out in October. So I have to make sure that I carve out some time, because once that book hits it has to be read immediately.
Super. When the weather gets cooler, you pull the Afghan over and turn the phone off. Wonderful. And then lastly, cultural events. I wanted you to explain what the Gloucester Meeting House Foundation is and how that differs from our church. I just adore their programming and wanted to explain to listeners that on Friday, October 10th at 7:30, the Gloucester Meeting House Foundation will be featuring Trio Gaia in a recital performing a program named Convergence, which explores the theme of conflict, both internal and external, and its resolution through music. The trio are New England Conservatory's most recent graduate piano trio in residence, and I already know it's going to be stellar because their programming always is. What is the GMF, Janet?
The GMF is the Gloucester Meeting House Foundation that I'm sure many folks locally, at any rate, have heard of. This was founded in 2015 by a group of people who really wanted to help the church develop in new ways. Part of it is the need to restore the building. I might have mentioned 1806 back at the beginning of our podcast. So it needs constant repair and renovation. And the GMF's goal is to renovate the sanctuary to become a 500-seat concert facility. They have also done a tremendous amount of work to do things like stabilize the bell tower and add sprinklers to the building, insulation, and most recently, as many folks here locally have seen, they got grant money to restore the allée, the front green, back to its original appearance, including replacing the historic elms. They found disease-resistant elms that will thrive there. So they have been an incredible partner. They are a separate nonprofit, but we're partners, and they are an incredible partner to help us stabilize the building and maintain our mission and make it more fun. It's always a lot of fun to work with the GMF.
Thank you for joining Reverend Janet Parsons and me, Carol Bousquet, today. We're the co-hosts of the Gloucester Unitarian Universalists podcast, Siding with Love. For more information, please visit our website, gloucesteruu.org. And speaking of love, we'd love to see you in church soon. Until next time, be well.